saw such happy manners, so much ease with such perfect good breeding. He is also handsome, replied Elizabeth, with a young man ought likewise to be, if he possibly can. His character is thereby complete. I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment. Did you not? I did for you, but that is one great difference between us. Compliments always seem to take you by surprise, and me never. What could be more natural than his asking you again? He cannot help seeing that you are about 5 times as pretty as every other woman present in the room. No thanks to his gallantry for that. Well, he certainly is very agreeable, and I give you leave to like him. You have liked him many a stupider person, dear Lizzie. Oh, you are a great deal too apt, you know, to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. All the world are good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life. I would not wish to be hasty in censoring anybody, but I always speak what I think. I know you do, and that is what makes the wonder with your good sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affection of candour is common enough. One meets with it everywhere, but to be candid without ostentation or design, take the good of everybody's character and make it still better, and say nothing of the bad, belongs to you alone. And so, you like this man's sisters too, do you? Their manners are not equal to his. Certainly not. Miss Bennet was therefore established as a sweet girl, and their brother felt authorised by some commendation to think of her as he chose. Chapter 5. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Sir William Lucas had been formerly in trade in Meryton, where he had made a tolerable fortune and risen to the honour of knighthood by an address to the king. During his mayoralty, the distinction had perhaps been felt too strongly. It had given him a disgust to his business and to his residence in a small market town, and quitting them both, he had removed with his family to a house about a mile from Meryton, dominated by that period Lucas Lodge, where he could think with pleasure of his own importance, and unshackled by business, occupying himself solely in being civil to the world. For though elated by his rank, did not leave him supercilious. On the contrary, he was all attention to everybody, by nature inoffensive, friendly, and obliging. His presentation at St. James had him made courteous. Lady Lucas was a very good kind of a woman, not too clever to be a valuable neighbour to Mrs. Bennet. They had several children. The eldest of them, a sensible, intelligent young woman, about 27, was Elizabeth's intimate friend. That the Miss Lucases and the Miss Bennets should meet to talk over a ball was absolutely necessary, and the morning after the assembly brought the former to Longbourn to hear and to communicate. "You begin the evening well, Charlotte," said Mrs. Bennet with civil self-command to Miss Lucas. "You were Mr. Bingley's first choice." "Yes, but he seemed to like his second better." "Oh, you mean Jane? I suppose because he danced with her twice. To be sure, that he did seem as if he admired her. Indeed, I rather believe he did. I heard something about it, but I hardly know what. Something about Mr. Robinson." "Perhaps you mean what I overheard between him and Mr. Robinson. Did I not mention it to you? Mr. Robinson asking him how he liked our Meryton assemblies, and whether he did not think there were a great many pretty women in the room, and which he thought was the prettiest, and his answering immediately to the last question, 'Oh, the eldest Miss Bennet, beyond a doubt. There cannot be two opinions on that point.' Upon my word, well, that is very decided indeed. That does seem as if, but however it may yet all come to nothing, you know." "My overhearings were more of the purpose than yours, Eliza," said Charlotte. "Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend, is he? Poor Eliza, to be only just tolerable. I beg you would not put it to Lizzie's head to be vexed by his ill treatment, for he is a disagreeable man, that it would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour, without once opening his lips. Are you quite sure, ma'am? Is there not a little mistake?" said Jane. "I certainly saw Mr. Darcy speak to her. Aye, because she asked him at last how he liked Netherfield, and he could not help answering her, but she said he seemed very angry at being spoken to." "Miss Bingley told me," said Jane, "that he never speaks with them much unless among his intimate acquaintances. With them he is remarkably agreeable." "I do not believe a word of it, my dear. If he had been so very agreeable, he would have talked to Mrs. Long, but I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he is ate up with pride, and I dare say he has overheard somehow that Mrs. Long does not keep a carriage, and had come to the ball in a hack chaise. I do not mind his not talking to Mrs. Long," said Miss Lucas, "but I wished he had danced with Eliza." "Another time, Lizzie," said her mother, "I would not dance with him if I were you. I believe, ma'am, I may safely promise you never to dance with him. His pride," said Miss Lucas, "does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very a fine young man, with family fortune, everything in his favour, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud." "That is very true," replied Elizabeth, "and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine." "Pride," observed Mary, who visit was returned in due form, Miss Bennet's pleasing manners grew on the goodwill of Mrs. Hurst and Miss Bingley, and though the mother was fond to be intolerable, and the younger sisters not worth speaking to, a wish of being better acquainted with them was expressed towards the two eldest. By Jane, this attention was received with the greatest pleasure, but Elizabeth still saw superciliousness in their treatment of everybody, hardly accepting that even her sister, and could not like them. Though their kindness to Jane, such as it was, had a value of an arising in all probability from the influence of their brother's admiration, it was generally evident, whether they met, that he did admire her, and to her it was equally evident that Jane was yielding to the preference we should become to entertain for him the first, and was in a way, to be very much in love, but she considered with pleasure that it was not likely to be discovered by the world in general, since Jane, united with great strength of feeling, a composure of temper, and a uniform cheerfulness of manner, which would guard her from the superstitions of the impertinent. She mentioned this to her friend Miss Lucas. "It may perhaps be pleasant," replied Charlotte, "to be able to impose on the public in such a case, but it is with sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded, if a woman conceals her affections with the same skill from the object of it. She may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it will then be but a poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. There is so much gratitude